All right, we should be good. Jason, I'm gonna go ahead and turn it over to you and let you kick this thing off.
Great, thanks. Thanks everybody for joining us today. Feel free to jump in if you have questions or thoughts, but what I thought we would do today is kind of revisit the question of housing affordability and kind of the presentation that we gave. I think it was sometime either early this year or late last year, talking about kind of the process, the limitations to housing affordability, and then kind of the thoughts we have on the RFQ and the process moving forward. But feel free to jump in if you have questions as we go. I am going to share my screen. Can everybody see that okay?
Yep.
So this is our kind of our jump off meeting for the ad hoc committee that was appointed for studying housing affordability in Knightdale. And as you recall, we've used this slide several times, kind of what is the question of affordable housing. And it's, traditionally defined as if a family spends more than 30% of their income to live in that house. And so, what the important part of this, I think, is if you look at that pie chart, it's talking about expenditures, but if you also look at it as a thought of placement of affordable housing, or just looking at housing affordability in a kind of a silo, it doesn't include everything else, which includes kind of the placement, location for getting groceries, resources, daily needs, or the transportation needs of the folks who might have the need for affordable housing. And so one of the things that the American Planning Association has kicked off over the last several years is several initiatives. And one of those is an initiative on a nationwide housing crisis. And they talk about, instead of promoting additional affordable housing, but really focusing on inclusionary growth. And so as we go through this process, I'll probably say that a lot. And so at the end of the day, a lot of our peer communities have passed or are in the process of doing housing affordability studies, but it might be in the best interest to talk more about inclusionary growth or an inclusionary community plan, which looks at being truly inclusive for housing, which is mixed income with market and subsidized units, whether rented or owned, in close proximity to one another, and also within close proximity to things like jobs, schools, transportation and mobility services. So being truly inclusive versus just focusing on the housing component, which we know is but one part of being an inclusive community. And Jason, with that, we're going to go ahead.
Sorry. This is something that Jason and I spend a lot of time, actually, we've talked about a lot here, and we're interested to hear your guys' thoughts too as we move through this process. I think a lot of the historical thought process was, well, to get affordability, you just need to build affordable, like, little pockets. And I think the best solution, Jason, that's not his thoughts. I know Donna, that's not how we think. Like, you want these mixed neighborhoods. And that's really what we tried to get with the UDO and comprehensive plan. You want these mixed neighborhoods of different housing price points and types, and this idea of making it all, like, it doesn't matter if it's a big house and a little house. It's, you want the affordable housing to blend into the whole neighborhood. Nobody should know it's really subsidized or affordable. If it's, it really should not matter. It makes a better community. So just, looking for your guys' thoughts on this kind of idea of inclusionary, like, neighborhoods and things of that nature. So just be thinking about that as we go along here.
Again, looking at housing affordability, this is a chart we've also used before that shows rental rates and where Knightdale kind of stacks up with several peer communities, and then looking at that median household income and how that stacks up. Again, this is from the Wake County housing plan that was done, 2018, 17, 18, that time frame, I want to say. But really at that time, one of the most important statistics we pulled out of that is, as a percentage of the overall housing stock, Knightdale, Zebulon, and Wendell lead with the most publicly subsidized units at almost 9 to 10% of the total housing stock Not sure how that number would be adjusted for today, but if you look at our peer communities throughout Wake County, it still seems that, a significant proportion of the publicly subsidized units are located within Eastern Wake County as a percentage of the overall housing stock, especially understanding how much larger some of those other communities are than Knightdale, Wendell, or Zebulon as well. Just understanding some of the regular.
Jason, one quick question on that previous slide. So if you can go back. So, okay, so this is home funds, Section 8, and I guess sort of like housing authority type. Okay, so this also includes tax credit, sort of workforce housing as a part of that overall share?
It does, yeah.
Okay.
Anything that's publicly or federally subsidized. So that includes low-income housing tax credits as well as those other HUD type programs.
All right.
Again, understanding kind of the regulatory framework that we operate under. North Carolina is a Dillon's rule state, meaning we have to have express authority for the General Assembly to do things, and not giving us authority does not necessarily allow us to do things. And so there is no express authority for inclusionary zoning. We know several communities in North Carolina do practice inclusionary zoning, including Chapel Hill, Davidson, Durham. Raleigh's doing it more at an ad hoc type way, just kind of tying it to legislative approvals. And there's no express authority for an affordable housing impact fee. I think that's the model in Davidson, is if you don't have inclusionary zoning, then you pay into a housing fund that is used for the town to publicly subsidize homeownership and other things like that. Looking at the full housing continuum, it goes, obviously from homelessness to market rate home ownership or rental, and everything in the middle is kind of what has classically been considered under the idea of housing affordability, things like emergency shelters, transitional housing, social housing, affordable rentals, affordable home ownership, things like that. So that's kind of those, middle of this is what's kind of in affordable housing. And then some of the strategies, homelessness prevention is obviously very important. Increasing home ownership, providing opportunities for affordable rental housing, and obviously a diversity of housing, which is a large part of the conversation with a lot of communities, which is the lack of that kind of missing middle, which is considered duplexes, quadplexes, townhomes, multifamily rentals, and the predominance of single family residential homes in the marketplace. So our current diversity of housing is 64% single family, 30% multifamily, 6% townhouse. This is from when I gave the presentation earlier. I'll tell you, this is a heck of we talked a lot about GIS last night and how easy and good of a tool it is, but this is a heck of a GIS analysis to do, and it's very time consuming. So we haven't updated this up to this point, but we will update these data points as we go through this process to understand what our housing stock looks like. But we do know what our proposed and approved projects look like, and it's getting, right there at the 50% mark, where townhomes and multifamily have really become a good percentage of the recent proposals or approvals, and single family residential is kind of not the, is still the predominant, but not as much as it was before. So really starting to build that stock of this missing middle housing. And that's largely due to our UDO tool, which is our required distribution of uses. This is where we kind of went to, we in our comprehensive plan, we adopted the idea of mixed density residential neighborhoods, but didn't really define what that meant. And so this was our attempt to regulate it and say, this is what our intent is. Obviously, through plan unit development, there's flexibility to ask for exceptions to this, but it looks at 40% duplex or townhouse, 40% as a maximum distribution, multifamily, 60% single family as a maximum. And then it has a minimums of 10, 5, and 15, and then looks to include some mixed use and civic and institutional type uses as well. So truly kind of mixed use communities. I'm again talking about the missing middle, that duplexes to kind of live work units and different opportunities there. We are seeing a lot of townhomes being constructed. That the conversation of that just being part of the missing middle is, still market rate home ownership, and the current market rates on townhomes are pretty expensive from what we're seeing right now. And so it'll be interesting to see when we get more and more on the ground of how that helps to provide that missing middle housing. But some of the other ideas that we're starting to see and that we think are good, probably exploratory topics, at least through our planning process, are stacked duplexes. We're starting to see a lot of these in proposals. The idea of cottage court communities where you might have smaller homes that front a common court versus individual yards, which take up, additional land and drive up cost. And then, the idea of live work units, true live work units that not only promote the ability to provide affordable housing, but also affordable entrepreneurship, which allows people to live and work in the same location if they choose. So talking a little bit more just about the planning process itself, we're having our first kind of kickoff meeting here in August 22. The idea is to release the RFQ this month with it due in September, giving us time to evaluate that during the month of October and coming back to the council in November with a recommendation on the consultant based on this group's feedback. And then using the month of December of this year to really negotiate that scope and contract, and then issuing a notice to proceed in January, and then a year-long planning process. And of course, whenever we put these together, we like to keep that continuum arrow going because implementation is ongoing on these planning processes. They don't stop when the plan is adopted. That's when they really start for us. That's when we got to hit the ground and get going on these plans. Talking a little bit about the actual process itself and what the process would include. Again, of course, existing conditions. Like I said, we need to update that chart. What are our current housing numbers? How many of our units are truly affordable at this point? How many are naturally occurring affordable housing? Really engage the community, both our partners with Wake County and others. But also looking at Knightdale as a whole and what the community has to say, and then identifying kind of visions and goals of housing affordability or inclusionary growth, and then looking at a needs and trends assessment of what are some other best practices and what are the needs that we have and how do those align, and then looking at really the makeup of the plan. If this was a skeleton outline of a table of contents, identifying the purpose and roles, a housing needs assessment, the community engagement and process, identifying our vision and goals, making some recommendations based on that, and then an action plan with implementation. And that's all we have as far as a presentation. I would like to kind of open it up and really understand anybody's thoughts on this idea of inclusionary growth or an inclusionary community versus solely focusing on housing affordability, and also any things in this that we might have missed that's really important to you that you want to make sure through the RFQ that we make sure we have the right consultant to address, whether it's something you perceive in the community or something that you have noticed that would be important to include in this plan.
So one question I guess that I have, and looking back at when, there was sort of this initial assessment of affordability, I think it showed what the median income was in Knightdale, and then it also showed where we were in terms of our median rental basis. Do we also look at this on the basis of median sales prices of homes? And do we know kind of where that is? Of course, I know the market is considerably higher now, and the likelihood that that fits within that sort of defining space of affordability is getting further and further off the tracks. But, as we had that discussion about the mixed use developments of townhomes and single family and all of that and condensed development, as you said, I don't know if the townhome solution is really all that feasible because they're coming in so much higher. So how do we align that? And I guess that's part of where the consultant or the sort of conversation will lend itself in this space, because I'm concerned that no matter how much we try to compact some of these developments and we try to create greater density to align with possible affordability, it just is continually pushing the market up further in terms of less accessibility. But anyway, so I guess the first part of that question is, what is our median sales price? in terms of homes? And then ultimately, will that individual help us to figure out, or at least to take inventory of whether or not this is a UDO alignment or whether there is something alternative outside of the market that we need to look at doing?
Yeah, so to answer your first question, it's easy to get that number. If you recall, when we did this presentation the first time, we tracked it over time with all of the other Wake County communities, and it kind of showed that the macro market has all gone up, and we've gone up proportionally. So if you went to where we stood, I think, and I don't have those charts in front of me, but where we stood in 2019, for instance, to where we stood in 2020, 2021, where the macro market went up, we were still proportionally in the same place as far as our median sales price, although they all went up, right? We were still kind of proportionally in the same place when you look at all of our peer communities. But I agree, you need to look at that median sales price as part of that conversation as well. It's something that is accessible from the Wake County Department, or they changed, it's not Department of Revenue anymore, Tax Assessor's Office.
Yeah.
And so I will I'll pull it up here momentarily when I give someone else an opportunity to speak, and I'll be able to report back that number to you. And I agree. I don't think that the only fix here is going to be a UDO distribution of uses. It's going to need to be some, programmatic things that are either done at a local or at a county level to help folks who might have a gap of affordability. How do we fill that gap? Whether it's loan programs with low interest rates, especially the way interest rates are going, trending right now, or is it opportunities to increase home ownership? Is it a policy to help increase the number of subsidized units? Is it things like that will be both a local and a county level conversation, because we participate in Wake County's entitlement program for CDBG funds and other federal funds that come through the HUD and other programs like that. And then is there a local, program? Is there something we can do locally that helps to achieve our goals, which may be different than the county's goals? I think that, the main goal I see at the county level right now is affordability at all costs, which is kind of like an emergency type response to, what is a legitimate crisis. But the impact of that is not, necessarily a best practice, which is kind of in the statement from the American Planning Association, which talks about, how concentrated poverty impedes economic mobility. So if you build just affordable housing where land is affordable, or where, you have any and all in any available open land, you're not necessarily helping people's economic mobility. You're just providing a place today. And we want to make sure as we grow that we're inclusionary in our growth. It's a very easy solution to an affordability crisis to find the cheapest land and build an affordable housing complex, and you provided shelter for somebody for the time being. But are you providing economic mobility and the ability to change the situation over time? Thoughts of like generational growth and things like that. And in order to do that, you got to be more strategic to say, yes, we need affordable homes, but it also needs to be located where people have access to services, transportation, other programs that they may need. And so we're looking at this from a different lens than just this kind of emergency response, understanding that there still is that need of right now, immediate need for housing in the community. I think there was a WRL article about doubling homelessness rates over the last 2 years or something like that in it was either Raleigh or Wake County. So certainly understand all that. It's much more programmatic than just the UDO. It's not, the UDO alone is not going to fix housing affordability. It's a long way for me to say that.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I know, I know Roseville, for instance, has done some land banking, and now they're looking at maybe some workforce housing and tax credit developments that will sort of fit within that makes the land accessibility, because that's always a major hurdle now, right? As you have these more affordable housing developers competing in the open market for the same land, they just can't get those margins correct, even with subsidies from private developers because of the price points. But if land banking, and then, that, like I said, looking at what those scoring mechanisms are when you're applying and competing for credits, and we look at that in combination with where we may look at banking some land opportunities for affordable housing. I think, like you said, it is a very complex approach, but, definitely one that's not insurmountable.
Jason, going up a few slides to where they have the different types of housing, we talked about, like from homelessness. Yeah. So with this one, can you speak to or talk a little bit about what's the difference between the transitional housing versus the social housing?
Yeah, so a lot of times what you'll see with transitional housing, this is, a stopgap between kind of being an emergency shelter to, a transitionary place. So if you look at things like the Raleigh Rescue Mission, Project Hope, that we're getting ready to look at, that is transitionary housing. So that's providing a stable place, not an emergency shelter. It's a stable place that they're going to provide services, and it's, dedicated to women and children, but they're going to provide, gymnasiums, school on site, all the things to stabilize someone who is in between, kind of a more ability to have a permanent residence, but not keeping them from homelessness or an emergency shelter. And then social housing would be more of like a shared quarters, or an ability to live as a group to combat cost. And you see that a lot more with kind of developmental disabilities and things like that, where you have social housing or like a family care home for people with disabilities, where they can share the cost of the housing in order to provide that space so they're not in a transitionary or emergency facility. Of course, the way that the Project Hope program works was a really good, actually, program they developed, and it could be a good backbone of kind of how you base a affordability or a inclusionary growth plan, as they look at getting through the transitionary phase. But then also on the same campus, they're going to have rental units that are affordable rental units to make that next step. So it's not just this is the affordable transitionary place, and then you go out and you find affordable housing in the marketplace. They're going to take folks all the way from homelessness to the transitionary housing to that affordable rental, and then give them the ability to either move to an affordable rental or a market rental, while also on the same campus providing a mix of market rate home ownership, where people are living together, mixed income, and really having the idea of supporting one another, but also having retail opportunities on site where they might be able to even provide employment for folks that are living there. So that's a really good model that we can look at as we move forward and start to kind of build the backbones of our program. That model, having all that on one campus is really exciting, and it's different way of thought than has traditionally been done.
Perfect. You answered my other question, so that's perfect. Thank you.
So while you have this slide up, one thought I had is, I think you mentioned this being sort of a regional approach, and I think it came up when we had our Eastern Regional meeting that Councilor Morris so graciously kicked off. And but it is, my question is, how much of this would be sort of a regional approach in Eastern Wake County or larger piece of the state? And then another follow-up on that is, when I look at this, one thing that sort of comes to mind is it can't just sort of be neat and orderly and pretty. I mean, there's some shifts. And for example, thinking about after like in Eastern North Carolina, after Hurricane Floyd, there was a whole lot of immediate emergency shelters, and that was sort of set up in the FEMA trailer spot. But then people went from there over to probably market home ownership, or back to where they were, maybe better than where they were. But also in that process, there was probably some reevaluation of where they actually were living was maybe not stable. So I think that's probably a bigger, there's times when you need a lot of emergency shelters, and then times you don't need so much, and then times where even more towards the right, the housing that we have is not sustainable. So I'm just wondering, that feels like an ongoing problem that we'll always have. Do you have any comments on that?
No, I certainly agree. I think the idea, long term is to provide opportunity and options. And so there's to have lots of different options is the best, strategy we can come up with. I think obviously, emergency shelters from emergency situations are unfortunate part of the process, but a lot of times that is, either one, you're correct. There's a lot of buyback programs that FEMA has when communities were placed in flood prone areas or areas that are susceptible to natural disasters. And so long-term relocation and things like that in emergency situations are kind of important, but maybe separate of the conversation of long-term affordability for the community and making sure that we remain inclusive as people choose where they want to live and providing an opportunity for everybody who wants to live here to have that opportunity, I guess is the best way I can answer that question. But looking at kind of regional level, I think, Wendell, Zebulon, Knightdale, and I believe Rollsville as well, all participate in Wake County's entitlement program. And that's the only reason that it's kind of at that regional level. None of us alone qualify as an entitlement community. It's a 50,000 plus population program. Most recently, Apex surpassed that and broke away from Wake County and chose to start their own community and development program. And they're in the infancy of that. That's also a good model to look at to start to say, based on the mayor's question last night, what happens when we get to that point? Do we want to continue working with the county? Do we want to do this on our own? There's a lot of benefits of working with the county. They have staff that know the federal requirements. So when you get federal dollars to do things like home ownership programs or even infrastructure projects, there's certain bidding requirements, there's certain wage interviews and things that have to be done that are very complex and, certainly exceed our staff capacity at this time. But should we have a plan in place to build that program incrementally over time to ensure we're building that capacity, if that's what we so desire, is part of what this process would start to put into place.
Jason, are we a part of a home consortium or a CHOTO that sort of covers the municipalities in Wake County outside of just Raleigh for any dedication of funds aligned with affordable housing initiatives?
I'm not aware of any other than our participation with Wake County.
Okay.
And then, there are other community groups that are important resources that need to be part of this conversation. We have one house on, I can't think of the cross street now, but it's on Flowers and is it Hester? That's owned by CASA. That's a transitionary housing for adults with development disabilities. And so that's, there's important other regional partners who are doing things in this space that need to be engaged. It's not just the county and the town. It's in economic development, they talk a lot about the ecosystem. It's kind of similar here. There's a lot of different players and people who need to be involved, whether it's the lenders that do, low income lending programs or, specialized lending programs, or is it the builders who specialize in that? But for us, I guess the most important thing is making sure that it's, we're utilizing the best practices we know today and not just falling on somewhat antiquated federal tax law that kind of encourages the concentration of affordable housing into one area or one development.
Yeah, we have a lot of advocacy groups. You have Habitat, you have these groups, and they have a goal. I mean, their goal is to get more units, and they're not necessarily looking for the mixture of these units into anything else, as long as you're just looking for a number of units. So, it's definitely a balance that we're trying to work with. And I think too, some of the meetings we've had with the county previously kind of got that feeling too. It's more about, hey, we need to put these units somewhere. The western side of the county is pretty built out. We're coming to the east, and it's like, hey, well, you know, proportionally we have a lot. We don't want to just put them in pods. We want to mix this stuff in and kind of make it into more of you know, harmonious with the entire community. You don't want it to be a separate neighborhood or a separate place. It doesn't feel right like that. So you know, just having those conversations, make sure we're advocating for ourselves and make sure we're doing what's right for the community too, I think as we go through this process will be important. You know, just making sure, you know, bring in the advocacy groups to know what their goal is. I mean, the goal is more units, which is our goal too, to a point. Don't want to lose sight that we want to make this the goal isn't just cheap housing. It's good housing that people can, you know, get into a stable living place so they can move into, you know, so they can increase their position in life as well.
Yeah.
I don't know a better way to say that, but
Well,
sorry,
I think
my coworkers won't be quiet in the background. I apologize.
I think you guys have said it perfectly with just inclusionary housing, right? It fits within the current mesh and scheme of what Nightdale is, you know, approving and has on the ground. It supports, you know, a balanced growth in terms of our community where, like you said, there's not this lopsidedness where one area is concentrated in just, you know, affordable housing or affordable rental or whatever. You know, we want these places to be a part of the overarching community. We want it to be where the employees of Nightdale, our fire, our, you know, our fast food, our teachers and assistant teachers can actually live in the community where they actually work as well and feel as if they are included as a part of that and not looked at in some way because they're on a different side of town or a different pod within town. So I think that inclusionary housing really is a great way of sort of framing this.
And another comment, I think it was on one of your slides too, Jason, if someone can live here, but maybe, you know, not have to have that extra car, you know, transportation, somehow we're taking care of transportation. Or maybe even it's just local transportation. You know, we're increasing greenways and maybe a scooter or a bicycle is a good way to get back and forth to work. There's transit, you know, those all add to what's coming out of pocket. So it feels like that would definitely be part of the conversation as well. And then the other, you know, just thinking about, we do traffic impact analysis and all kind of analysis. Is there any type of analysis for, you know, the impact that new development will have around surrounding, you know, when I think about we may have residents, I think a lot that are in right now affordable homes, but the next revaluation, just their, you know, homes paid for, but now my taxes are double what they were. So now it's starting to not feel as affordable. So I'm assuming that also will be part of the conversation when we start talking about possible grants or whatever the case may be to help with just taxes.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, the county has several, you know, tax relief programs based on, you know, both income-based tax relief programs, but also age-based tax relief programs for those on fixed incomes. And that's an important part of it as well. What happens if you're not within those brackets? So, you know, to Councilor Evans' points, the workforce, you know, retail worker, firefighter, police officer, teacher, who might not fall under that income bracket, but that tax bill is looking a lot more like it's going to force you out of, you know, Nightdale or being able to stay here long term. How do we kind of combat that? And I think, you know, there's not a one size fits all answer, but I think there is a good part of this study will give us, you know, what are the tools to combat the different scenarios that may come up. And that is a very valid one that I think, you know, a lot of coastal communities have dealt with. They, you know, some of the folks, the communities on the Outer Banks or, you know, towns are looking at building apartments just so that they can have the teachers necessary to educate the young folks who live out there. And so that's, you know, part of it all. Obviously, if home ownership is the goal for an individual, we want to have a path for them to get there no matter what. And if they want to, you know, if rental is the choice, then have a path to get there as well, both market rate or affordable, depending on the scenario. So I agree that is something we should look at as part of the study as well. And to answer your earlier question, Councilor Evans, 2021 median sales price was 325,500. Pre-pandemic 2019 was 265,000, and the great year of 2015, where I started working for the town, it was 214,000. So it's certainly gone up quite a bit in the last 7 years. But if you looked at where that landed on a countywide level, we went up proportionately with everybody else. It's not we've become all of a sudden unaffordable. I think the county as a whole has. And I think that's another, just something to add that I just thought of as we go through this, is kind of engaging other partners. I know part of some of these large corporations that are coming into the market that are looking for the tech workforce that are housed in Nightdale, and they're I won't say causing, but are a contributing factor to the rising home prices overall. Should they have several programs to help combat that impact, and so we should certainly engage folks on those levels and look for opportunities there to include some of the private sector partners in helping us find maybe innovative solutions to this issue that's kind of become a more regional issue as well.
Jason, can you bring us all back together?
Yes. Sorry.
No, you're fine. It's hard staring at the little boxes. I don't have good eyes. Hey.
I would have done that a lot sooner if you would have mentioned it before. It's really hard to talk with the slides up.
No, you're fine. Okay, so next steps are crafting the RFQ out. So Jason, are you and Donna working on that now? And do we feel like we have good information, kind of direction to start that?
Yeah, I feel like based on the conversation today and based on what we know, it's very easy in municipal government to borrow and not create new, but I think we might want to create a little bit new here to kind of take a different approach than what's been done before, but not something that's so far off that it's not getting to the root of what we need to have, a good plan at the end. So Don and I are going to find a good cross between of that to create an RFQ that we feel includes both some of the things we talked about today and some of the other issues that lead to more inclusive communities. And our goal was, I think, timeline wise, Donna, correct me if I'm wrong, August 12th, 10 days from now. I think that was our goal. We can obviously shift as we need to. We have, we feel like starting this next year allows us to get out of the community input stage of the River District Small Area Plan. So that's a heavy lift, is the community input part. And then once we get to the draft part, we can, kind of split that up between different members of our department to kind of draft different areas of expertise. Also gets us through the CTP to get started. So anything that we work backwards from January to get started feels good to us as far as capacity wise. And so August 12th, I think, was our original goal. We can obviously shift there, but if y'all are good with it, we can craft the RFQ and move forward unless there's a desire for like a group review of that. But I think we have a good idea of what everybody here is looking for.
I think I would like to, maybe if we could at least get it drafted and at least send it out for a quick individual review, maybe, unless the group wants to come back to review it. I think if we could send it out via email, let everybody kind of peruse it like over a weekend, and then, come back and just make sure everybody feels good about what's included, and then still try to meet our deadline if that's possible. Maybe push it out a couple of days. Is that okay? You feel all right with that? I just want to make sure everybody feels good about it before it hits the street.
And the only reason I was sort of asking about a regional thing is I don't I'll leave this up to you and your expertise, but we may discuss it here. But if there were other communities that were also basically doing the same thing at the same time, it may be at least a thought maybe worth exploring, partnering with another community that's doing basically the same, at least reach out to Wendell, Zebulon, Roseville. I don't know how you feel about it, but at least make it part of the plan that we're reaching out to others around, because if there's affordable housing nearby, that somebody can use that as a stepping stone to then get into Nightdale. I mean, it helps Nightdale as much as it helps the other community.
I hear what you're saying. I don't know if I'd want to work with them on our plan because their community is different than our community. I know what you're saying about duplicating efforts, but like if you look at what they build or what their UDOs allow and what ours allows, I think ours is a little bit different. Well, not a little bit. Ours is different. Just like ours is different than Apex and Wake Forest and everybody else's that have some of these housing plans already in place. And our needs would be different. I mean, we're similar, but we're still different. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like Zebulon, heavy commercial, not a lot of residential. Wendell's pretty much building. They have a lot of residential going on. I think Wendell's a lot heavier on the residential than commercial than we are. I think we're about the most balanced in Eastern Wake County with residential commercial. I think they're seeing. I know Wendell's probably seeing as much, if not a lot more growth than we are right now, Jason, in the pipeline. And I just think circumstances it's probably better to stick in-house. I think we bring them in as partners. I think you probably reach out and you have these conversations during the, as we gather input for the plan itself. I think we definitely reach out and we have some of those discussions with the consultants and them as part of the process. I don't disagree there at all. I don't know about partnering to create because then you're talking about a regional housing plan, and that feels more like what the county's doing, kind of like working with everybody to make sure everybody's plans are kind of aligning at the end of the day, if that makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense, and I think one comment, I mean, you hit on a little bit there, Dustin, but looking at the graphs too about where subsidized housing is, I think. And maybe that's just something we bring up at our Eastern regional conversations that, I mean, okay, maybe, maybe you are built out, but there's always, I drove through Cary not too long ago when they were doing a lot of redevelopment. So I think as much as we can say that let's sort of, make sure that folks can live in Western Wake County just as affordably as they can in Eastern Wake County, I think definitely would be part of it. But, it's the only comments I had.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I think we have a pretty good direction moving forward on the RFQ, so we'll try to get something out. Let me see some dates here. Donna, don't let me overpromise your time.
And Andrew's ready to jump in whenever you need him to, Donna. I see him. He's
got all the input.
He's ready to be a planner. He's got the Parks and Rec planning down.
Exactly.
So maybe we shift our goal maybe a week or so. So we try to get y'all a draft on the 12th. And then the idea then would be to post something by the 19th. So all feedback would have to be pretty immediate on it. I don't think it's a big lift for anybody to read RFQ, hopefully. And then we can move forward from there if that works for the group.
For me.
Works for me.
Donna, does that feel good for you, Donna?
Yep, I think that works. That's fair.
It gives you some extra. It gives you some extra time to put it together anyway. So extra few days anyway. That feels good. So.
Does anybody, Andrew, Donna, I guess, didn't have a lot of opportunity to speak. Any additional thoughts or questions? I know that was a lot of information really quick. Andrew, I know that's not your area of expertise, but happy to try to include enough to catch everybody up here. But happy to answer any questions you might have as well.
No, I appreciate the effort you put into that presentation. That was very informative for me coming from the Parks and Rec standpoint. I kind of want to, I'll echo Mr. Morgan's thoughts on kind of the connectivity to the greenways, because if they're connected to greenways, they're connected to, the parks and everything in that general nature. So from our standpoint, our department, that's what we want as well. People to be able to access these parks and everything. So I think that's a good thing to focus on there.
Thank you. That's very good. I'm adding that to my list of things to add to the RFQ.
Jason, I got one quick question. And earlier in the presentation, you had mentioned something about, was it Statesville or someplace that was sort of looking at some modeling around impact fees for developers or something of that sort. So is that something that is at least in an exploratory phase of what we could also look at implementing? Like you said, if we are starting to look at attracting more commercial and sort of having that public-private partnership, just like I look at like the Gateway development that we're looking at, potentially moving forward, if that's bringing in 200 to 300 jobs, and is there a way that creates some type of niche where we can also align it with some impact fee type of processing that helps with affordability, whether it's down payment assistance, rental assistance? Just curious as to, how that is looking in another community, and if there is any impetus that it could actually, work in some of the scheme that we're looking at.
So the short answer is no, it's probably illegal to charge an impact fee because we don't have the express authority from the General Assembly to do so. The way that Davidson is the community that's doing it is and I think Chapel Hill has a similar program, to be quite honest with you, and we can explore it and look at it for sure, is they have a requirement that in each development, a certain percentage, let's say 10% of every development has to be affordable. And so if you have, 100 homes, 10 are affordable, right? And if you're, I'm trying to do math on the fly, and that's never a good thing for me. So y'all excuse any inaccuracies here, and you know what I mean, I hope. So if you have 100 homes subdivision, 10 are required to be affordable units. And say you're a developer and you're in Davidson, you're probably starting out at $500,000 per a house. Right, it's a pretty small house. It's a very expensive community, very nice, very walkable, close to the Lake Norman. And so if you're a developer, you'd say, I can't put 10 affordable units in this development. It doesn't make my pro forma work because I paid X dollars for the land, and I need each home to start at 650. And, there's all these other things I have to do because, Davidson's making me, I can't make any of these units affordable. So in their fee schedule, say, okay, you can't do that. You would owe the town then, let's say $2,000 per affordable unit as like a fee in lieu of providing the affordable housing. And so then the developer would deposit with the town the resulting what is that, $20,000, right, to the town, and then the town would use that in their affordable housing programs to provide those units somewhere else, or as an incentive to another developer to provide those units, maybe in a multifamily complex or in a townhome, row home, or something like that, or as down payment assistance. And so that's how they have kind of gone around that lack of express authority. If they were truly challenged on it, I could not tell you where, the current courts would land with it, but they have tended to be somewhat developer friendly over municipalities here lately. So that's a long-winded answer, but it's the best one I got.
That works.
I could just made it easy in 1,000 a unit. That one I had to do math in my head. I don't know what's wrong with me sometimes.
Jason, just a quick, when we look at the overall spectrum, I know we're looking at it from the homeless shelter and leading up to like market home ownership. I want to make sure that we extend further and make sure that when we're thinking about all the different ways that we can include affordable housing and different things like that, that we're taking into account our seniors, people who want to retire here. So just wanted to make a quick mention of that.
Yep. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting too, and I think as you're sort of rolling out the RFQ, and I know Donna's just got tons and tons of great thoughts. She just won't share them right now. But there's, I think there's also just wherever we can use educational opportunities. I mean, that's certainly absolutely something the town could do, where, making resources available and education. I mean, there could be, certain people may not realize like the importance of life insurance. It's, even early in life. And then all of a sudden they find themselves homeless because of, all of a sudden their income has dropped to a point where housing is just not affordable. So there's other things there when you start talking about the broader conversation around housing that I just want to make sure we touch all things. And I think we're all on the same page there. I know the mayor and I have had a lot of conversations around it too. And it's an area where I think we want to really dabble in. It's just, it's always challenging for municipalities to get into that. But certain things like education and training and making resources available, making sure that I think there is a way to get developers involved, even helping sponsor some of that. But anyway, just want to mention that as well.
I have a running list of all these, just so y'all know what I'm writing down is kind of all these things to include and make sure we get this either in the RFQ as something we want to make sure the consultant explores, or as kind of a conversation to have as we continue this process.
And I got one last comment. I know Councilor Morris is probably cutting eyes at me now, but I will say, as I sat back and, as we kind of went through this whole presentation, and I got to thinking about the things that we've recently approved or have on the drawing board, honestly, I feel like we are tracking very well when it comes to, some of the inventory in our diversity and inclusionary housing. When you look at the Habitat project, you look at the senior development that's going up over Planners Walk, you look at, the Raleigh Rescue Mission. I mean, like, we are really incorporating a lot of different mixes into sort of the affordability and the diversity of housing options. And so, I just felt like, we definitely have to also applaud the successes of where we've gotten to, even without having this comprehensive study, and definitely, leaning more towards how do we develop workforce housing and affordable home ownership is sort of the key into that component as well. But kudos to you all for, like I said, really helping to vet out and bring forth some opportunities to, diversify where we are currently. So, I think we've done a lot of good things, and clearly we got a lot more good to go.
Yeah, I think that brought up a comment I would make, say, from last night on our survey. I have to go back and look, but is there something on the survey about housing affordability and various stock of housing? But I think we would definitely want to include that on our citizen satisfaction survey.
It's already on there.
Okay, good.
And I'll be sending an email out later. I got the rest of the information for y'all on that piece.
That puts us right about time, Dustin. I don't know if you have anything else, but give everybody 3 minutes of their afternoon back if there's not any other thoughts.
I just want to say thank you all for taking your time. We will get this RFQ out. Thanks to Jason and Donna and Andrew for taking time and working on this stuff. And thank you three counselors for joining us today, and look forward to getting this process moving. This is exciting. This is going to be a good plan. I'm really excited to see what we get out of this. This is going to be a good process. So, all right. If y'all have any questions in the meantime, you can reach out to me or Jason, and we'll get it going. So thank y'all.
Thank y'all.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
All right.